Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got some 2020 vision for you. I want to talk a little bit about, specifically focusing on the knife industry, some of my hopes, my dreams, my desires for 2020, some of the things I loved in 2019 that I hope are going to keep going, and just kind of share my thoughts and my dreams going forward here. But first off, a disclaimer. These are just my personal opinions. I'm doing my best to advocate for things that I think should be, a little wider. I'm trying to act in such a way that I wish would become universal law. But nevertheless, I am one person with my own biases and desires. The other thing to remember is I'm just some random jackass. I am not in the industry. Maybe there are elements of this that I'm missing. Maybe I don't understand some fundamental. Maybe I'm just an idiot. That's a real possibility as well, and I'm sure people in the comments are going to tell me that. But nevertheless, this is the kind of thing that I loved in 2019, and the kind of thing that I'm looking forward to in 2020, or hoping for at the very least in 2020. And I figured some folks have been asking me for this, so I'd go ahead and make this video. To start with, we'll focus on what I really enjoyed in 2019 and what I hope carries forward. One of those things is steel performance. What I mean by that is that this year we saw a huge debate about steel hardness, steel performance, cutting performance, etc. This was in large part driven by a small but extraordinarily loud chunk of the community. And although within that group, I think that some of the methods used weren't as rigorous as claimed, and I think that some of the bombastic and conspiracy-driven argumentation by a couple of those folks really hindered their ability to make good change. And in fact, I hope that there becomes a new wave of people focused on this who are able to hold people to the fire while still maintaining the rigor and argumentation needed to make these kinds of things stick. But nevertheless, the point that they raised fundamentally was not a bad one, which was that although steel chemistry matters, at the end of the day, performance is about much more than chemistry. So heat treat and edge geometry really do matter as much or more as the steel that's being used when it comes to cutting performance. And so as a result of all of this kerfluffle, as a result of all of this loudness, people have started talking and asking questions about things like heat treatment and grind. It's not just a question of what does it say on the blade? Does it say 20 CV? Is it good? No, the question is, how is the actual steel performing? Is it actually thin enough behind the edge to cut things? Is the edge durable enough for test? That kind of testing has kind of come to the forefront. And given there were progenitors of this, and certainly, it's been out there for a while, but this year in a lot of ways it sort of came to a head. And so the fact that people have now started to ask questions about things like heat treatment and grind, that's important, and it put lazy makers on notice that you can't just print the right steel name on the blade at the top there. Instead, you have to back it up with a higher performance heat treat and edge if you really want to be accepted, especially in the higher end of the community. So I hope very much that in 2020, companies will continue to focus not just on buying the right steel, but on doing that steel justice, and I think that would be an absolutely beautiful thing. Next up, we've got the one other trend that I very much appreciated is sort of the modernization of traditional knives, or the traditionalization of modern knives. I don't know quite which one to say, but this year we actually had a number of entries in the modern traditional sort of vein that I think were really cool. Lion Steel had a pretty successful line of very modern slip joints. Although they certainly had their ups and downs in places, I'm definitely a fan of using modern materials, modern stainless steels, and modern construction to build some knives that have much more traditional sensibilities. But we've also seen this elsewhere. For instance, this guy, the Pena front flipper trapper, is a really nice example of a knife that is fundamentally traditional in sort of its aesthetic and its idea, but at the same time is entirely modern in its execution and even its deployment method. I'm a big fan of this kind of an approach, and I think it's great to have the modern industry looking back at the traditional world to see what we can learn. Similarly, just uses of things like wood or micarta, the nice micarta here, nice micarta here, and even kind of old traditional aesthetics on this. This is a CRKT CEO right here. This is a Pena front flipper trapper, Sevivia Elementum, but the use of those kinds of materials on modern pocket knives I think is really excellent, as well as the use of modernized slip joints, which are going to be good legally speaking for a lot of folks around the world. There's a lot to learn from traditional materials and designs. I really can't wait to see more of this uniting the past and our knowledge from the past to the knife world and the future in the future there. Next thing that really brought me some joy was actually companies that were willing to step out of their traditional price range. The notable people for this are actually Spyderco and CRKT. Spyderco for a long time has focused in that, say $70, $80 to $250, $300 range. But this year, they stepped outside of their comfort zone a little bit, producing higher-end pieces like the Paisan, which I don't have, but I just threw my Nirvana on the table here as an example. But CRKT, in many ways, is an even bigger example of this, having released a number of very, very high-end knives on the higher end. They didn't always land perfectly, but the thing is, this kind of exploration, and in some cases they did. In some cases, it produced something that was absolutely and truly excellent, like this titanium home front here. It's the CRKT Panache, the CRKT Shock, by the way. But some of the results of this were absolutely astounding. And I really, really love seeing diversification of options from these kinds of big-name makers, especially when they're makers like Spyderco and CRKT who have a stable of really great designs that collectors would love to see high-end versions of. I'm really excited to see this kind of a thing, where makers are willing to go through all parts of the price range, expand and grow out into 2020, because I think there's a lot of joy there. Then finally, one of the biggest trends, maybe the biggest trend I want to see keep going in 2020 is the trend towards the budget end of things. Even throw the Civivi on the table here. 2019 was in many ways a great year for budget knives. Frankly, it was more exciting in the budget range than it was, I'd say, in the really high-end range. There was a lot more interesting stuff going on there. By the way, Gerber Fastball, CJRB Centros, Civivi Backlash, and Civivi Elementum. But there were a bunch of $40 knives out there that felt like, an $80 to $50 to $80 range in the couple of years ago, right? I mean, if some of these knives had been released brand new in 2017, 2016, they would have been world beaters at $80, and now, well, maybe that's not true, but still, they have been really, really pushing the value in a pretty aggressive way. And so I love very much that we've got lots of great designers dropping great pieces at very, very, very nice prices and exploring that $50 to $80 range that has felt like a very open gap in the knife world. I'm definitely a big fan of that, and a couple of companies, particularly Civivi, Wii's sub-brand, have really been pushing hard on the value end and been delivering some things that are really excellent. Even things like, a pattern-welded Damascus-style blades in that kind of budget price range that aren't bad. Oh, yes, indeed. And so 2019 was a year of great excitement in the budget realm, with good pieces like the Flat Iron, like the Centros, like this guy, the Backlash, although that was an older model, but Civivi's done a bunch more, and like the Elementum, that have been making a lot of people really excited, who for a long time, due to budget or frankly just due to geography and exchange rates, haven't been able to get into the higher-end knife game. So I really hope to see more great options in the budget realm from the whole of the industry. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I hope that continues forward. Now, let's talk a little bit about what I want to see in 2020. So for 2020, I got a couple of hopes, dreams, and desires that I think would make the industry a slightly better place for the community generally. That's how I have to advocate, and I think would probably help us all out a little bit. One of them is one that I've already mentioned before, which is that we need to limit limited editions. I am really, really tired of limited editions. In fact, I had a whole rant video that I'm just going to link above. Limit limited editions. But basically, long story short, 2019 was a year that was annoyingly full of people making knives for just a couple of minutes and then discontinuing them. Some of the very best knives of 2019 are not available in 2020, and many of them were hardly available then. And you know what? This is dumb. You can watch my whole video for the rant, but I really hope that in 2020, companies stop or at least slow down wasting their time and ours on limited production products and focus instead on making great gear available in numbers that a variety of people can get them. Because I'm just really tired of all of this churn that's leading to a quick death for really great products. So I really hope that limited editions are a fad for 2019 that is not carried forward, because, guys, come on, we're done here. Speaking of things I'd like to see fewer of, actually, I'd like to see fewer knives in general. This is, and what I mean by that more specifically is I want to see fewer knives, but I want to see the ones that launch be even better thought out. Some of the biggest offenders in this particular game were the companies who dropped so many models that I can't even remember a quarter of them. Some of the biggest offenders were CRKT, were Wii Knives and Civivi combined, and then Artisan and CJRB. Both of these companies dropped a whole bunch of completely forgettable models alongside some really incredible ones. And that kind of bugs me in a pretty substantial way. Because you end up with the good pieces being washed away. You know, in trading card games, there's this notion of a pack filler, which is a weak card that nobody really wants. You open it up, it's like, okay, you put that aside, and then eventually you find the good stuff in there, and there they need to do them to make people buy more packs. The thing is, I don't know why they need to do them here. I mean, And certainly there's always uncertainty as to what's going to be a takeoff hit. But the simple fact is that, that people are making these knives that have absolutely no reason to exist. This comes back to my why video, which I'll probably link up here as well, where I highlight a number of new knives these days that just do nothing exceptional. There's no reason for them to exist, really. And by the way, I'm not calling these guys out. These are all actually quite good knives. But the companies have produced a bunch of stuff that it's just like, why did you make this? Why is this a thing? This didn't need to be a thing. This is a thing in 50 other places with mine. And that kind of bothers me a lot, because I'd rather see these companies focusing their efforts on relatively fewer products, but giving them the thought and the marketing and the production time that they all deserve. And I want to see these companies having a filter. I want to see somebody saying at some level, you know what? No, we don't need to make that one. It brings us nothing. It'll only make us look bad. And this way, the great work is emphasized. The great designs are able to shine through. I'm picking up the CRKT CEO because it was one of the hits, I think, for 2019. That way, people remember the really great work, and the perception of the brand isn't hindered by all of these crappy and forgettable filler kind of pieces. And then people might go forward and remember, wow, they had a really good year. That was a strong lineup rather than a bunch of crap, but a couple of good ones, because I think that's a really beautiful thing. So I really desperately hope that 2020 has fewer releases, but of better knives. Next thing I'm really hoping for is a bit of geographic diversification. Now, you all know that it is my firm belief that quality is about effort rather than geography. But the thing is, I still want to see very good diversification around the world of good OEMs, because the fact is that great custom makers can be found everywhere. If you go to a Blade Show, for instance, you will find great customs coming from every corner of the world. Countries I've barely heard of have an amazing, custom maker. They're like, hey, rock on. And that's an absolutely beautiful thing. But production knife companies are getting rarer and rarer. And right now we have sort of a monoculture of Chinese knife making. And you know what? Of a bunch of different companies, some of their very best work is coming out of companies overseas. You've got companies like We Knives, which are making these guys. You've got, unnamed OEM kind of stuff, but all coming from overseas. You've got Rayot, who's been doing amazing work for a bunch of different people now. But I really want to see a little bit more diversity there, right? I mean, with the exception of a couple of low-volume makers, a lot of the very best high-end, high-volume production knives are coming out of a few companies in China. And the thing is, having any one country or any company controlling large parts of the market, I think, is unhealthy, because then it becomes vulnerable to political unrest or, in some cases, grandstanding, geopolitical changes. You know what? Just think about it this way. If we and Rayot suddenly doubled their pricing, or their pricing was doubled for them, how much hurt would we be feeling right now, particularly for newer designers who are just trying to break into the market? That would be really difficult. And so I feel like this lack of diversity in the market is a major weakness, and it's an area where the knife world is vulnerable to huge unrest. Now, I want to be 100% clear about something. I am not wishing ill on any company right now. In fact, I don't want to see anybody having a close-up shop. But what I want to see is more excellent knives being made by more companies around the world. I would like to see more shops in the US that are doing great mid to large volume OEM work. Now, don't get me wrong. There are really great American companies. I am not trying to diminish them in any way, shape, or form, but it's very much easier for a new designer to find a place overseas to have their designs made rather than having it be done in the US. And similarly, there are other companies around the world who are doing good work, but I'd like to see those knife makers, especially the ones that are starting to lose clients to China, thinking about getting the same quality of grind, the machining. QC is a big one, and fit and finish that we're seeing from some of these high-end Chinese companies. And frankly, I'd love for a brand new designer or a company, frankly, a big production company, that's fine too, who has a really great design on their hands. I'd like to have them have a much better number of options of places for their designs to be made. So although I know that pricing will be different, made in the USA will never be as cheap as made in China. Frankly, made anywhere else might not be as cheap. I'm not getting into the geopolitics here, but the simple fact is we as the market need to be willing to put our money where our mouths are, so to speak, and support new OEMs who are doing great work. But in order for that to happen, there need to be more OEMs doing really great work. And so I think it's important that interested designers and companies have more choices of factory, and that we don't become too dependent on any one company or country to keep the great knives flowing. Next thing that is a really important thing for me, and I think is a really nice trend in 2019 that needs to carry forward, is cutting performance. There is a role for your occasional folding pry bar. There is a role for knives with a really thick grind that are just, they're around. But the thing is, this year, it has become eminently clear that a production knife company can actually deliver great edges. And in many cutting-focused tasks, reasonable stock thickness and a nice thin grind is just going to perform better and make for a better cutting tool. I think that savvy companies are realizing that the market that is heading this way, because a number of companies did go thin and slicey, and they got huge accolades for it. I mean, Three Rivers Manufacturing, particularly with the Atom, really nailed a thin and slicey blade, and a lot of people are going crazy for it because it's like, holy crap, this knife cuts. And that shouldn't be a thing, but it's a thing. Quiet Carry has been, they're doing really, really nice stuff there. Even Spyderco has really been focused on edge thickness for a long time. In a lot of ways, they've been making knives that cut better than most of the industry for a while because they've had this understanding in mind. And they are a big volume production makers, so don't tell me, oh, you can't grind thin at big volume. Yeah, you can, okay? And so even some companies like We Knives and Rayot are starting to get there. And in fact, a number of companies upped their grinding game in 2019. Lion Steel went from a little bit on the thick side, to put it very, very nicely, to actually grinding some really nice traditional slip joints this year. Rayot has gone whole hog on good grinding. Some of the work they did for Brian the Doe, or even this little Pena, these are ground a lot thinner, and that's a beautiful thing. Even Monterey Bay Knives has worked with their OEM to get a bunch of really thin, slicey sorts of things going down. That's a beautiful thing. And so I think it's pretty clear that amazing cutting performance is something that collectors are craving, and that knife users are craving. That, sure, there's a role for you folding pry bars, and, not every knife has to be thin and slicey, but by God, have something in your lineup for people who actually want to cut things. And so, although not all knives need to be slicey, good performance in cutting tasks should be the default, and I hope that 2020 continues this trend of companies realizing that pry bars are a bug, not a feature, and putting more faith in their customers' ability to handle a knife, and we will finally see a year where many of the knives are really designed to cut rather than to pry. Then finally, maybe the biggest thing I want to see coming for 2020 is a focus on the everyday person. The industry has for a long time made knives for every pocket. You have had all sorts of different options with all sorts of different materials, all sorts of different sizes. You've got all kinds of different things out there that are going to be, there's going to be a great option for pretty much anybody in pretty much any circumstance. But the marketing machines for this industry have been so fixated on military, first responders, badasses, the whole tactical world. I mean, heck, even the biggest releases of the year for these companies are most often, done at SHOT Show for some reason, which is primarily a firearms trade show. I mean, guys, there's a whole trade show for this where your fans are actually, welcome and invited. Just saying, you might consider. But anyways, this focus on weapons of war marketing feeds directly into the kinds of fear-based lawmaking that companies are, that people like Knife Rights are trying to fight back against. And so I take exception to it. It bothers me a lot because this kind of weapons of war marketing also scares away a portion of the people who I think could be our very greatest allies in stopping stupid laws and rules and regulations. If half the soccer moms at the soccer field are carrying a pocket knife because it's a good tool, and some idiot comes along, we should ban knives at the soccer field, they're going to be like, no, you idiot, I have apples here, I need to open. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we need, and it also eliminates key demographics in the outdoor and daily use world who might need a great cutting tool, but who don't fantasize about jumping out of planes with guns. And so I very much hope that the industry is going to realize that, these days there are getting to be very few pairs of tactical pants without a knife in them, but there are millions of purses and skinny jeans and outdoor jackets that are missing a really important tool. And so perhaps more than anything else, I'm hoping that 2020 becomes the year of the everyday human in the pocket knife marketing world, where people are focused more on practical than tactical, where people are building more things that are tools rather than, marketing more things as tools rather than threats, and trying to, go forward at a little bit lower speed, a little higher drag, but much greater acceptance. Because this provides, in my estimation, a very nice way forward both for the industry and for the hobby, and opens up a whole new world of people who are going to be not only interested in our passion, in our hobby, but also potentially buying within it and advocating for it in the future. So, at least to me, that's what I'm hoping for 2020, is a focus on the everyday person rather than the tactical market. I'm hoping on a focus for cutting performance. I'm hoping on a little bit of geographic diversification, so that way we're not dependent on a couple of OEMs in one particular country. I'm hoping for fewer knives that are better thought out. I'm hoping for fewer limited editions, a continued focus in the budget realm, exploration throughout the price range, good modern and traditional options that are combining the two, and I'm hoping that manufacturers are constantly thinking about things like performance, heat treat, and edge geometry to go forward and create tools that are better than we've ever seen before. So in a lot of ways, 2019 was a very interesting year for us. In a lot of ways, it was a very boring one, but in some, there were gems there. And I'm hoping very much that 2020 is going to be even better. Well, I hope 2020 is going to be way better for that matter. I hope that I'll actually be able to get any of the damn stuff. But anyways, nonetheless, those are my hopes and dreams for 2020. What are your hopes and dreams for 2020? Go ahead and leave a comment down there below. But mostly, I hope you found this interesting. Let me know if you disagree in any places. And mostly, I hope that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.